Hello, and welcome to Revising Like a Pro, a writing studio workshop from Concordia University, Irvine. Before we get going, I want to tell you a little bit about our services. Here at the Writing Studio and Online Writing Lab, we believe that every writer deserves a reader. We provide free services available to Concordia students, faculty, and staff. We provide writing feedback, resources like handouts and workshops, and events all aimed to help you become a better writer. Check out our services. Today in our workshop, we will be covering the following questions. What is good revision? How do I revise my writing? And how do I know that I've done it right? So let's get into it. What is revision? When writers talk about revising, they're usually calling upon a shared understanding of the writing process. And the writing process is generally considered to have 3 or 4 phases that all kind of fall under different names. The first phase of writing is known as pre-writing. So this can be brainstorming, organizing, researching, outlining, but it's the stuff that happens before you get to the page. Drafting is the act of writing your essay down on the page in the way that your writer will read it. Third is revision, which is when you meaningfully or significantly alter a piece of writing after it's been written. And fourth, editing and polishing. Revision is different from the other phases of writing because it assesses, identifies, and rethinks existing writing in order to enhance it. If we think about the root word for revision, vision means to look. So revision means to look again or to look anew. What is the difference between revision and editing? Often you might hear those terms synonymously, and we know that both happen after the initial drafting phase of writing, but they do differ in significant ways. While revision is looking to make changes or adjustments to the mechanics, organization, research, or otherwise significant components of your paper for an overall stronger product, editing is making minor or syntactical grammatical changes that do not significantly affect or change the meaning of your paper for an overall smoother product. So revision looks to make writing stronger. Editing looks to make writing smoother or easier to read. So why should you revise? Well, thinking again about the steps of writing, revising helps produce an overall better reading experience. Your process and ideas may and should evolve and change as you write your paper, but your reader will only read your paper one way, as in from start to finish, beginning to end. Revision bridges your ideation phase, or when you're thinking of your important ideas, and then the finished paper that they come into contact with. Your final draft should reflect one finished product, not something still needing significant work. So revising helps get you there. Another way of seeing revision is understanding that it's an act of care for the person who will be reading your paper. So here are some ground rules for good revision. 1, good revision needs an outside perspective. We need to know whether or not we're doing well with our goals. Second, good revision needs to work in phases. And third, good revision is best done over time. So how do we make good revision happen? We're going to talk about 3 tangible ways for you to achieve good revision. 1, by scheduling time for feedback. 2, planning for multiple rounds of revision. And 3, making a timeline and sticking to it. So when scheduling time for feedback, this is what we should keep in mind. We often say that good writing is accessible to a wider reader or audience, but we ourselves aren't an ideal reader of our own work. We already know what we're trying to say, or maybe we're working through what we're trying to say. But to know whether or not it's effective, someone else needs to mirror back to us what we've written. Talking through your ideas can be helpful. Conversation is a great tool for clarifying your thinking. But when you schedule time for feedback over a draft, whether that's a working draft or a completed draft, that can offer vital insight to your paper's success. There are a couple different ways you can ask for feedback with a draft. 1, you can meet with a friend, a roommate, or family member. Or two, you can make an appointment at the online writing lab if you're a graduate student, or the writing studio if you're an undergraduate student. I think we all know from conversations with our friends, or maybe even tough writing experience, not all feedback is helpful. So here are some questions that you can ask someone else to help them give you meaningful feedback about your paper. These questions might include, have I addressed the prompt? Does the order of my paper or organization make sense? And is it easy to see why my sources matter? Some notes to keep in mind as you work. One, the great thing about revision being different from editing is that you don't have to talk about grammar or formatting unless you want to. And second, asking for feedback really only works if you have time to get feedback and incorporate it into your essay meaningfully. A good practice could be letting your reviewer know how much time you'd like to spend revising your essay. The type of feedback someone might give you, knowing that you only want to spend an hour on it versus 6 hours, could be significantly different. So this is always good to let your reader know. Second, when planning for multiple rounds of revision, we want to keep in mind that it's hard for us to hold a lot of information in our mind's eye all at once. Because we know that it's hard to assess and address everything that goes into a paper at the same time, we think that it's helpful to revise in phases. A way that you can understand revising in phases is by thinking of magnifying glasses or lenses that help you pick out specific areas, knowing that you're going to reach other areas later on with a different lens. Here are some parts of your paper that you could focus on in rounds of revision. 1, document formatting and citations. 2, the way you develop your argument or main point over the course of the paper. You might do this by looking at your thesis statement and then topic sentences to see how they work together. Next, you could look at the connection between your beginning and the end of your paper. Often, a lot of time has passed when we first start writing our paper and when we reach the end of it. So looking at the two next to each other could be a helpful way to revise those meaningfully to make sure they go together in one paper. Something that we believe in at the Writing Studio is working smarter, not harder. We don't want you to have to revise one sentence over and over if it's not going to be necessary to your final product. So we also say that we like to start global or with big picture ideas and then revise locally or with smaller ideas. Look to make big changes in your paper before little changes to avoid making unnecessary edits. It wouldn't make sense to perfect the way a sentence sounds if during revision you're going to eventually cut that sentence. So making big changes like taking out extra writing or reorganizing your paper, changing your thesis, that type of revision already alters sentences. So that should happen before you do sentence level revision. Something to keep in mind as you revise in phases. Think of your essay like a puzzle and don't glue the pieces down. Another way to say this is leave room for new ideas and connections as you work. Sometimes a component of an essay just works better somewhere else. But if you can't pick up parts of your essay to move it around, or if you don't allow yourself to see those new connections, you won't be able to take them when they come up. And then second, never throw out or delete your work. If you work on paper, use lots of paper. And if you work on a computer, use lots of drafts. Who's to say that the writing that you don't think should go into the final version of the essay might not be helpful elsewhere? It's always important to save your work. So finally, you want to make a timeline for revision and stick to it. We know that it's hard to make good work under pressure, but it's also hard to motivate yourself to finish a product without a deadline near enough. So we consider planning an act of self-care. When creating a timeline for your paper, longer papers will need a longer timeline. Shorter papers need a shorter timeline. But no matter what, here is what your timeline should include. First, when you will have a first or working draft. Second, when you will seek feedback from another person. Third, time for trying new methods and ideas. Fourth, time for breaks and frustration. And fifth, time for editing once your major revision is finished. Something that might be helpful to keep in mind is that many of your classes help build, or your professor might say, scaffold a timeline for you for major essays. The more you know yourself and work on your writing, creating your own timelines for revision, the easier it will be for you to set up accurate timelines that allow you space for both work and rest. But what does this look like in practice? Here's an example of 4 phases that you should have in your revision process. Maybe this happens over the course of a month, with each step taking a week. This could also happen over the course of a week, with each step taking 1 or 2 days. It depends on how long your paper is and how much support you want to give your paper. In your first phase, you'll schedule your OWL or writing studio appointment well in advance. Many of you know that our writing studio and online writing lab fills up quickly near major deadlines. Knowing that a paper is due around finals means that you should probably start planning your writing studio or OWL visit well in advance, even if you don't have your paper ready yet at the time that you make the appointment. As long as your paper is ready by the appointment day, you should make that appointment. You'll also want to get different perspectives before committing to your final approach. In addition to the writing studio or OWL, try to explain your paper or what you've been working on to someone not in your class to see how accessible it is to an outside audience. In the next step, revise in phases, working from the biggest or global issues to the smallest or local issues. In the third step, this is a great time to protect your time and space. Schedule your work time. If you know that you're a busy person, you have family or lots of extracurriculars, build time in your calendar for solo, alone working time in a place where you feel comfortable and productive. But also, you should be taking space away from the paper so that you can return to it with fresh eyes. Frustration happens in writing. It happens to the best of us. So protecting your time and space should also include time for relaxation and decompression so that you can bring the most to your paper when you do work with it. And finally, when you're the closest to the deadline, you'll want to make sure you've left ample time for editing and formatting. This is making sure your APA is on point, or looking through your references and making sure that you have clearly referred to all of your included sources. Regardless, it's a best practice to aim for an early finish to that major paper so that you have time for unforeseen issues without the stress. If your printer breaks down or the Wi-Fi goes out or your professor changes the prompt suddenly, having your paper done early means that you can take those changes in stride and find a solution without the stress. We've talked about tangible ways to revise your essay, but how do you know that you've got it right? Here are 3 things to keep in mind. 1, you've revised meaningfully if you can concisely explain your work. You can easily explain both what you've accomplished and how it answers the prompt or task or assignment. You feel familiar and comfortable with the material and how you used it. Second, feedback is consistent and positive. Other people can easily explain your work back to you, its purpose and your specific points. They can mirror the most important parts back to you. We often say that if you can teach it to a 5-year-old, you've mastered the course material. So, can you explain your paper to a 5-year-old? And could they tell you back what is really important about it? If you can do this confidently, you've probably revised well. And finally, all good things must come to an end, and so must stressful things too. The thing about writing papers in an academic setting is that you're always going to reach a deadline. If your paper is going to be due soon and you've done the best you can with the time that you have, even though you might be able to make more changes with more time and revise the project further, The fact is that a deadline helps you finish well. You should feel like you've made the most important changes that you could in your time frame, and that's how you know that you've revised meaningfully. So in summary, revision matters. Revision can help you turn a good idea into a great one. It takes time and effort, which will be evident in your final draft, and you don't have to revise on your own. Great revision is in part created by time, space, and outside perspectives. Remember to read your paper with others, revise in phases, and plan out your schedule because it'll make it way easier to try new things. With that in mind, you are now a revising pro. Happy writing, you've got this. If you want to explore more of our resources or workshops that we have available on a variety of writing topics, visit us at cy.edu/student life writing studio.